Last Tuesday, I was at a gas station, and the guy in front of me was doing something I used to do all the time. He swiped his card, it declined, and without even flinching, he pulled out a second one. Swiped that, declined too, then a third card. He looked at the cashier, mumbled something about the system being down, and walked out without his gas. I stood there watching because I've been that guy. And if you're watching this, there's a decent chance you have been too. That moment where you're not just broke, you're mentally trapped by it. Every single decision you make is filtered through this invisible weight sitting on your chest. Should I eat out or cook tonight? Can I afford to call in sick? Is this check going to clear or am I going to overdraft again? There's a specific number that makes all of that noise go away. Not $1 million, not six figures, not even close. It's 20,000. And what happens to your brain, your career, and your entire relationship with money after you cross that line is something nobody talks about. So if you want to understand why most people stay stuck financially, while a few quietly break free, stick around, because this might be the most important money video you'll watch this year. So here's what most people believe about building wealth. They think it's a straight line. You save a little here, invest a little there, and slowly, over decades, you become financially stable. That sounds reasonable, right? It's what every personal finance book seems to suggest. Work hard, be patient, and eventually the numbers will add up. But here's what actually happens. Wealth doesn't build in a straight line. It builds in steps, invisible steps, and each step has a threshold you have to cross before the next level unlocks. Think of it like water heating up on a stove. You can raise the temperature from 100 to 200 degrees and nothing dramatic happens. The water just gets warmer. You could watch it all day and think nothing's really changing. But when it hits 212, everything transforms. The water doesn't just get hotter, it changes into something fundamentally different. It becomes steam. It goes from a passive liquid sitting in a pot to a force that powered the entire industrial revolution. That's what $20,000 does to your financial life. It's not just more money sitting in your account. It's a phase change in how your brain operates, how other people treat you financially, and what opportunities become visible to you for the first time. Most people don't realize this threshold exists because they've never crossed it. They're stuck somewhere between $0 and $10,000, watching their bank balance go up and down like a heartbeat monitor, never gaining enough traction to feel fundamentally different about their relationship with money. And the financial advice they're getting doesn't help. Most financial gurus are obsessed with the big numbers. They tell you to focus on your first million, to max out your 401k, to think about asset allocation and diversification. And that's like telling someone who's drumming to focus on their swimming technique. It's technically correct information, but it completely misses the actual problem. The actual problem is that your brain literally cannot think about wealth building when it's consumed by survival. And this isn't just my opinion. Research from Princeton University, published in the journal Science, demonstrated that financial stress reduces cognitive function by the equivalent of 13 IQ points. That's not a small dip in focus. That's the difference between normal functioning and being completely sleep-deprived for an entire night. When you're worried about making rent, when you're calculating whether you can afford groceries this week, your brain doesn't have the bandwidth to think about index funds or compound interest or dollar-cost averaging. It's too busy running threat assessment on every transaction in your checking account, trying to keep the whole house of cards from collapsing. But here's the part most people miss entirely, and it might be the most important thing you hear today. That cognitive tax isn't permanent. It's not baked into who you are. It lifts the moment you create enough of a financial cushion to stop worrying about immediate survival. And for most Americans, based on average living expenses and cost of living data, that cushion is right around $20,000. Once you cross that line, your brain gets its full processing power back, and that's when everything starts to change. Let's start with what $20,000 actually does to your psychology, because this is where the real transformation begins. According to Bankrate's 2025 Emergency Savings Report, 59% of Americans can't cover an unexpected $1,000 expense with savings. Let that number sink in. More than half the country would be financially derailed by a car repair or a medical bill.
And 24% of Americans have zero emergency savings. Nothing. When you're in that group, your brain is running a constant background program called threat detection. It's scanning every situation for potential financial danger. Your boss makes a comment about budget cuts and your heart rate spikes. Your car makes a weird noise and you feel sick to your stomach. Your kid needs new shoes and you're doing mental math at 2 a.m. This isn't just stress. Psychologists call it a scarcity mindset. Researchers Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir documented in their work that scarcity literally narrows your cognitive field. It's like looking at the world through a paper towel tube. You can see the immediate threat right in front of you, but you're completely blind to everything on the periphery, including opportunities. But when you hit $20,000, that paper towel tube disappears. Suddenly, you can see the full picture. The Federal Reserve's 2024 survey of household economics found that only 55% of adults have enough savings to cover 3 months of expenses. When you have $20,000, you're not just in that group. You've separated yourself from the majority of Americans financially, and your brain knows it. It stops running the threat detection program on full blast and starts allocating those cognitive resources toward growth and opportunity instead. A friend mentions a great job opening, now you actually hear it. A coworker talks about a side project that's generating income, now you have the mental bandwidth to ask questions and explore it. You go from being blind to opportunity to seeing it everywhere, and that single shift in perception is worth far more than $20,000.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is where the math starts doing things that feel almost unfair. The numbers behind $20,000 create what I call the acceleration effect, and once you understand it, you'll never look at saving the same way again. Let's say you're investing $500 per month into a diversified index fund, earning the S&P 500's historical average return of roughly 10% annually. Getting to your first $20,000 takes about 33 months, almost 3 years of consistent effort, sacrifice, and discipline. That's the hard part. That's the uphill climb where most people give up because the progress feels painfully slow. But your second $20,000? That only takes about 26 months. Same effort, same monthly contribution, same risk level. You shaved 7 months off the timeline. Why? Because while you were sleeping, going to work, watching Netflix, living your life, that first $20,000 was quietly generating its own returns. It was working alongside your monthly contributions, compounding in the background like a silent business partner who never takes a day off. By the time you're pushing for your third $20,000, the timeline drops to about 22 months. Your fourth, about 19 months, and it keeps accelerating. When your portfolio hits $200,000, you can generate an additional $20,000 in roughly 10 months without increasing your contributions at all. The same milestone that took you nearly 3 years to reach the first time is now happening almost on autopilot. This is what most people don't understand about compound interest. It's not just a nice concept you read about in a personal finance book and forget about. It's a mathematical force that gets exponentially more powerful the more fuel you give it. And $20,000 is the point where you can actually start to feel the engine turning over. Before that amount, your investment returns feel like pocket change. A 10% return on $2,000 is $200 over the course of a year. That's nice, but it's not going to change your life. A 10% return on $20,000 is $2,000. Now you're generating real money, money that showed up without you trading a single hour of your time for it. That's the moment where the math stops being theoretical and starts becoming a tangible force in your daily financial life. Now let's talk about what $20,000 does to your career, because this might be the most underrated benefit of all. The Financial Health Network's 2025 Pulse report found that only 31% of American households are considered financially healthy. That means when you have $20,000 saved, you're operating in a fundamentally different reality than most of your coworkers, and that changes everything about how you show up at work. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you negotiate from a position of total weakness. You can't ask for a raise because you're terrified of rocking the boat. You accept terrible working conditions, unreasonable hours, and disrespectful treatment because the alternative is not making rent.
You don't explore better opportunities because you can't afford even a 2-week gap between paychecks. Most people in this situation don't even realize they're trapped. They think they're being responsible or practical, but what they're really doing is making permanent decisions based on temporary financial circumstances. I call this the golden handcuffs of poverty. You're chained to your current situation not by golden benefits, but by the complete absence of any financial cushion. But $20,000 breaks those chains. When you have 6 months of living expenses sitting in a savings account, something fundamental shifts. You have what I call quiet confidence. You don't need to announce it, you don't need to threaten to quit or make dramatic gestures, but something changes in how you carry yourself. You speak up in meetings because you're not paralyzed by the fear of consequences. You push back on unreasonable deadlines because losing this particular job wouldn't destroy your life. You apply for that position at the competitor, or you pitch that business idea you've been sitting on for 2 years because you can afford to take a measured risk. And here's the part nobody talks about. Most people never actually touch their emergency fund for this purpose. They never quit in dramatic fashion or walk out of a bad meeting. Just knowing the money is there changes their entire energy and posture. Managers notice the difference. Colleagues respond to it. Opportunities start gravitating toward people who operate from a position of abundance instead of desperation. It's not luck, it's not cosmic, it's basic psychology playing out in real time in every office in America.
But here's the part that will blow your mind. Let's talk about the single biggest wealth destroyer in America. And it's something that most people treat as a necessity rather than a choice. Cars. According to Experience Q3 2025 data, the average monthly payment for a new car in America is $748. For used cars, it's $532. But that's just the loan payment. Add insurance, which averages around $225 per month for full coverage according to Bankrate, then gas, then maintenance, and most Americans are spending somewhere between $900 and $1,200 every single month just to get from point A to point B. Over a typical 69-month loan term, that's over $50,000 in payments alone on a new car. And it gets worse. 1 in 5 new car buyers in late 2025 committed to monthly payments over $1,000, according to Edmunds. Over $1,000 a month for a depreciating asset. And here's the painful part that most people refuse to acknowledge. The moment you drive that brand new car off the lot, it loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone. You're not building wealth. You're actively incinerating it while simultaneously locking yourself into years of payments that prevent you from investing. Now compare that to what happens if you take even half of a typical car payment, say $375 a month, and invest it in a simple S&P 500 index fund instead. At the historical average return of roughly 10% annually, that $375 per month becomes approximately $76,000 in 10 years. In 20 years, it's over $285,000. In 30 years, you're looking at nearly $790,000 from $375 a month. Let that sink in. The person driving the brand new SUV with the leather seats and the panoramic sunroof feels wealthy. They look wealthy to their neighbors. But the person driving the 8-year-old Honda Civic and quietly investing the difference, they're actually building wealth that compounds while they sleep. And once you have $20,000 saved, you start seeing this distinction everywhere because your brain finally has the capacity to think about opportunity cost. That $50 dinner out isn't just $50 anymore. It's what $50 could become in your investment account over the next 20 years. This isn't about becoming cheap or joyless or counting every penny until you're miserable. It's about becoming intentional with your money for the first time in your life. And that shift in perspective only happens after you've crossed the $20,000 threshold, because that's when your brain finally has the space to think long-term instead of just surviving until Friday. Now, here's the part nobody talks about, and it might be the most counterintuitive thing I'll say in this entire video. What $20,000 does to your spending habits is actually the opposite of what most people expect. When you're broke, you obsess over every small purchase. You agonize over the $4 coffee. You feel guilty about buying name brand cereal when the store brand is 90 cents cheaper. You compare gas prices at 3 different stations to save 8 cents per gallon.
You spend 20 minutes in the grocery aisle comparing unit prices on pasta sauce. This micro-optimization feels productive, it feels responsible, but it's actually a massive waste of your most valuable resource, which is your mental energy. The Allianz Life 2025 study found that 38% of Americans rank financial stability as their number one focus for the year, the highest percentage in over a decade. But most people chasing that stability are spending their energy on the wrong decisions entirely. They're cutting coupons when they should be negotiating their salary. They're switching to cheaper coffee when they should be refinancing their mortgage or shopping for better insurance rates. They're saving pennies in the grocery aisle while hemorrhaging dollars on housing, transportation, and debt interest they've never bothered to examine. But here's where $20,000 changes the game. When you have a solid financial foundation, you stop sweating the small stuff and start focusing on what actually moves the needle. Your housing costs? That's typically 30 to 40% of most people's budget. Negotiating a $200 reduction in rent or refinancing your mortgage saves you $2,400 per year, which is the equivalent of giving up your daily coffee for an entire decade. Your income? A single well-timed job switch or promotion can boost your earnings by $10,000 to $20,000 annually. That's more money than you'd save in a lifetime of clipping coupons. Your investment allocation? The difference between keeping $20,000 in a savings account earning less than 1% versus investing it at the historical average of 10% is potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. These are the decisions that actually determine whether you build wealth or stay stuck in the same spot year after year, and you can only focus on them clearly when you're not drowning in the mental noise of daily survival decisions. $20,000 gives your brain the bandwidth to finally play the right game. So let's zoom out for a second and look at what happens over time. Because the gap between people who cross this threshold and people who don't becomes almost unrecognizable within 5 to 10 years. The person who hits $20,000 and keeps going develops what psychologists call a growth identity. They stop seeing themselves as someone who's bad with money and start identifying as someone who builds wealth. That identity shift sounds subtle, but it changes every financial decision they make going forward. They don't just save because a YouTube video told them to. They save because that's who they are now. They see a flashy purchase, and their first instinct isn't envy. It's a quick mental calculation of what that money could become if invested. Meanwhile, the person who never crosses that threshold stays trapped in the same cycle. They get a raise and their expenses rise to match it within a month. They get a tax refund and it disappears within a week on stuff they can't even remember buying. They tell themselves they'll start saving next month, next year, after this one big expense clears up. But that month never comes because without the psychological foundation that $20,000 provides, there's nothing solid to build on. 5 years from now, the person who crossed the $20,000 threshold could have $80,000 to $120,000 invested, depending on their income and discipline. They're exploring real estate. They're thinking about passive income streams. They're mapping out a path to financial independence that actually has real numbers behind it. They negotiate confidently, spend intentionally, and sleep through the night without the weight of financial anxiety pressing on their chest. The person who didn't cross that threshold? According to the Financial Health Network data, there's a strong chance they'll still be in the same position. Same paycheck-to-paycheck reality, same financial anxiety, same feeling of being stuck. Not because they're less intelligent or less hardworking, but because they never built the foundation that makes everything else possible. And here's the data that puts this in perspective. The FINRA Foundation's 2024 National Financial Capability Study found something alarming. Americans in the middle income bracket, those earning between $25,000 and $75,000, are increasingly struggling with the exact same financial challenges as lower income households. Same difficulty building emergency funds, same trouble managing debt, same inability to plan ahead. The middle class is being squeezed from every direction, and the difference between those who escape that squeeze and those who stay stuck in it often comes down to one thing: whether they built that initial $20,000 foundation before life had the chance to swallow every dollar they earned.
Look, I want to be straight with you.
$20,000 isn't going to make you rich. It's not going to solve every financial problem in your life. And saving that amount when you're starting from zero is genuinely hard. It takes months, sometimes years, of saying no to things you want so you can say yes to something bigger. Nobody should pretend that's easy. But what $20,000 does is far more valuable than the number itself. It rewires your brain from scarcity to abundance. It gives you the breathing room to make decisions based on strategy instead of panic. It starts the compound interest engine that does more and more of the heavy lifting as time goes on. It changes how you show up at work, how you think about purchases, and how you see your own future. And most importantly, it proves something to yourself that no amount of financial advice or motivational videos could ever prove for you. That you're capable of building something real, that the pattern can be broken, that your relationship with money doesn't have to look like it always has. You get to decide whether you're going to keep running on the same financial treadmill for the rest of your life, or whether this is the year you step off and start building something that compounds. The math doesn't care about your background, your education, your current income, or how many times you've tried before. It works the same way for everyone who shows up consistently. The only question left is whether you'll start.